Good afternoon, Prof. Mark and fellow classmates. I am Isaac from Group 6, and together with me I have Zikin and Zhenghan. We will be presenting on C.2, Materialism and the Quest for Profit for Engineers. To start, let's go through the agenda for today. I'll be going through the first portion, explaining why I feel that engineers are interested in acquiring material wealth. And then Zhenghan will then talk about how far engineers are willing to go for the material wealth, and Zikin will end off with case studies and scenarios where engineers have to make difficult decisions involving wealth and the right thing to do. Do you feel that engineers are interested in acquiring material wealth? To me, yes, but before we go into that, let's define what material wealth is. Material wealth is having an abundance of valuable material possessions and resources, being rich. So, what is important to engineers? After researching, it has come to my attention that there are the few important factors engineers look out for: recognition for their work, opportunities for growth, and that their ideas are heard in the place they work at. And as engineers, the greatest thing that we want is to have our inventions be relayed to the people around. So, what about material wealth? Before we even talk about engineers, let me ask you a question. Who here doesn't want to be rich? I'm sure at least a good 95% of you want that, and it is in our human nature to want material wealth. Even now, we are all here to get a degree in hopes of getting a well-paying job in future, right? At least that is for me, for security in my future. Linking it to engineers, that is the same for them too, since they are actually humans also, and definitely would require their job to be stable, pays well, have security, and that there is career progression. And notice how all these factors boils down to one thing, that they consider the fact of material wealth into what is important for them. Once again emphasizing that it is only human to do so. After all, no one would want to work at a company that pays less and doesn't offer any progression in their career, right? So to me, I feel that it is perfectly okay for them to pursue material wealth, but the one thing that they should never ever forget or never forsake is the code of ethics for engineers. And why is that so important? Because as engineers, our field of work not only affects us, but potentially affects the public and even the world. One small little mistake or greed may cost the lives of many innocent people, and in the end, we will have to bear the weight of these consequences and lives on our shoulders. Which is why the code of conduct for engineers states that engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public in the performance of their professional duties. The code of ethics really aims to help engineers not go astray. That is, in pursuing material wealth, they should always put the safety, health, welfare of the public first in everything that they do, even if it means forsaking the material wealth that can be obtained in a choice between wealth or the safety of the public. And with that, I'll hand over my time to Zhenghan. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Zhenghan, and my part of the presentation will be on how far engineers will go in acquiring material wealth. So all around the world, there are multiple forms of codes of ethics. However, they are generally based around the same fundamental principles for professional engineers. In the next few slides, I'll be going through 4 case studies: the Boeing 737 MAX, the Ford Pinto incident, the Volkswagen emissions scandal, as well as the Nico Highway collapse, where some of these principles were not followed. This is the first case study, the Boeing 737 MAX, where 346 people died in 2 separate crashes, just 5 months apart from one another. According to Bloomberg.com, former Boeing engineers have said that relentless cost cutting have sacrificed safety, and more specifically the failures of the 737 MAX were due to an emphasis on speed, cost, and shareholder value. So, looking at the fundamental principles from the NSP Code of Ethics, we see that the first principle, hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, was clearly not followed in the pursuit of material wealth. Secondly, this is the Ford Pinto incident. On 10th August 1978, a Ford Pinto was hit from behind, causing the fuel tank to rupture and burst into flames. This caused the deaths of 3 teenage girls. Ford engineers were in fact aware of the dangers and the unsatisfactory rear structure. As we see on this slide, Ford management had already conducted a cost-benefit comparison. So the expected compensation that Ford had to pay was $50 million or 180 deaths, which was actually less than the cost of the suggested changes of 137 million. Thus, they chose not to go through with the suggested changes. So once again, we see that the first principle, hold paramount the safety, health and welfare of the public, was clearly not followed. Third, this is the Volkswagen emission scandal. So between 2009 and 2015, Volkswagen had a software to cheat US emission tests. So their cars were allowed to emit 40 times the legally allowed amount of nitrogen oxide. On top of that, they claimed that their vehicles were green diesel vehicles, but the impression projected to outsiders did not reflect the reality. Firstly, they lied to the US government, and they also lied to the public, or in other words, their potential customers, some of which were actual eco-conscious buyers. As we look again at the fundamental principles, the fifth one, avoid deceptive acts, was not followed. Lastly, going back to Singapore, I'm sure most of you will find this image familiar. It's from our lecture 3, the Nickel Highway collapse on the 20th of April 2004, where 4 people died in this event. So what happened? There were significant design errors that were made, and should such an error ever be acceptable by any standards? The answer is no. But of course, this is easier said than done. So this is the error chain from our lecture 5. We can see that as engineers, we work as a team. From the management to the maintenance to the crew on the ground, we all have to work together to be on the same page and ensure that everyone is safe by breaking the error chain such that an accident will not happen. So for this case, the second fundamental principle, perform services in area of competency, was not followed. So engineers working on the Nickel Highway, they failed to exercise care and were dishonest with themselves, their employers and their clients when they chose to take up this assignment. They were clearly not on the correct level of competency when they took up this assignment. So being an engineer also includes the responsibility of calling and obtaining professional and expert services if required for assistance. So let's say a certain technique, tool or software to be used is questionable, then this uncertainty should be disclosed fully to all parties. Before I end off, I would like to say that accidents may not solely be the fault of an individual engineer on the ground. It could be a mixture of factors, maybe one person or a group of people. And one example could be engineers being afraid to speak up to the higher management because of the sake of job security. All in all, I feel that how far an engineer goes in acquiring material wealth has to be bounded by these few fundamental principles or the code of ethics, and it will be completely unethical to disobey any of the principles in here. With that, I'll hand over my time to Zikin to tell you more about engineering ethics. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenghan. I'm Zikin, and I will be presenting the last segment of this topic. The question, if you knew you had an opportunity to make more money, but you don't really need it, would you do it? And it depends on the definition of opportunity. Personally, even if I was rich and I do not need the money, as long as the money does not contain blood stains on it, I am more than happy to increase my personal wealth. This mindset is not just mine alone, but is held by many rich men who continue to become richer each day. And I believe that even you, the audience, wouldn't mind taking up the chance to make more money, if it is clean money. The next question, if your superior asks you to do something unethical or unsafe against your professional values as an engineer, would you do it? How would you manage the situation? Would you report him or join him in the quest for more money? And there are many ways that we can respond. What we could do is to close both our eyes and conveniently ignore the fact that what we could be doing could potentially cause great harm to society. Or we could critically evaluate the circumstances and come to a decision based on our values. One way we can do so is through the Socratic method that we have learned in lecture 3, where a person can find the answer to any problem by breaking it down into a series of questions and then finding the answers. First and foremost, I will clarify why the act must be done before jumping into the conclusion that my superior wants me to commit an unethical act. Like what we have learned in lecture 5 on the different thinking models, we each have our own mental model which influences how we think and what we might perceive to be unsafe to us. Instead, we should take a step back and listen to the rationale of our supervisors before jumping to conclusions. Listed on this slide is a 3-stage test that I will use to evaluate the situation, and I'll walk you through the evaluation. First, I will evaluate if the act is legal. Law is a system of rules created and enforced through social or governmental institutions to regulate behavior. Breaking any part of the law can amount to criminal offense, and I can be liable to jail and fine. As a reasonable person, if the act to be done is clearly against the law, I will not act on it, and I will even report my superior. Steps as to how I will report my superior will be elaborated later. If the act is lawful, I will proceed to evaluate the risk involved, mainly the risk and harm. And I don't mean risk of being caught here. I refer to the safety risk and hazards that I will expose to myself or the public. As we learn in the lectures, risk equal probability times severity. To illustrate how I would evaluate the risk in a real scenario, take the Large Hadron Collider example that was cited in our lecture 4. The severity was that the whole Earth could have disappeared, but the probability was so insignificant that the scientists went ahead with the experiment. Such cases illustrates that while there could be unsafe elements, as long as it is calculated and reasonably practicable, we are able to execute these tasks. Third and lastly, if the act breaks any code of ethics that I am morally obligated to comply with. I define ethics to be the various code of ethics that engineers are expected to follow. Some of the well-known codes are National Society of Professional Engineers, NSPE, and Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. The various code of ethics tells us that we should hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. As discussed previously, if there was no malicious intent and mitigation of risk is possible, I will proceed with the act. However, it will be a different case if the act was to be done with the intent of harming the public. An instance where I will not acquiesce is where the intent is clearly malicious and intended to prioritize money over the lives of people. In this case, Ford Engineers has deduced that the losses to be paid out in lawsuits for the death of the drivers was less than the cost needed to rectify the gas tank's design. If I was the engineer tasked to certify the vehicle safe at that point in time, I will not do so, and in fact, I would certify it unfit for driving, and I will even report my superior for wanting to commit such an unethical act. Based on this roadmap, if the 3 stages are satisfied, I will execute the task. Else, I will report my superior through proper channels if possible. First, I will inform my superior that I am unwilling to do such an act, and he should stop all efforts to pursue the tasks. If, however, my superior insists that I still carry on the task, I will resort to internal whistleblowing, where I will report my superior through channels within the company if there exist such channels. Many organizations nowadays have internal whistleblowing platforms and allow people to submit it anonymously. Should there be no action taken on the superior, what I will do then is to consider external whistleblowing. According to Richard T. D. George, who wrote a textbook on whistleblowing, as long as we fulfill the 3 criteria on the slide, we are morally obligated to externally whistleblow. I would also gather documented evidence to report not only my superior, but also the company for condoning the act. To summarize, our group has presented on the topic of how far engineers will go in their pursuit for wealth. We talked about why engineers would be interested in wealth, and some of the case studies where engineers have gone beyond the line. We then ended off by stating what we would do in a hypothetical situation and some of the remedies that we would consider. That concludes our presentation. Thank you.